Item number 12. File item number 12. And Mr. Knopp, are you starting this discussion?
Yeah, and I think we were on number 11, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I did flip over. Yes, you're right. Yep. My apologies. Year in review.
So did Dan slip out? Well, we'll do this. So one of the things that we're talking about right now is wanting to give the council, at your request, an overview of what's gone on over the past year, as well as what are we looking forward to under item 12 in 2014. So what we've done is want to take a little bit of a retrospective, because 2013 has been a real transitional year for the council. Up until June, we have been, I would say, probably 80% of the staff has been consumed in building a plan. We've also been providing comments on other documents, principally BDCP. But the majority of our effort has been in building a plan, and then I'm leaving the science part out of it because Peter is going to talk about that, which they've been busy building a plan actually as well. But so we've been very active in the planning part. But what got us to this point and what's going to get us into the future has been a lot of collaborative work with other agencies. And a case in point, I think, is if we look at the recent past, and I'm looking back a couple of years, we've got the State Water Resources Control Board flow studies that, while narrow in scope, looking at flows required just for fisheries and which does not reflect the balance that they're now engaging in looking at inflow and outflow studies on the Sacramento-San Joaquin, it still was an essential component that had to be done. And so we had collaboration there. We had an economic sustainability plan that was created by the Delta Protection Commission. Here again, now that we provided funding for that, but there were a number of different agencies that contributed to that sustainability plan. California State Parks prepared a recreation proposal for the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta and Suisun Marsh. The Department of Food and Agriculture commissioned a UC Davis report and a Delta study about agriculture in the region. As a result of that, the sustainability plan proposed strategies to enhance the economy and analyze the impacts of several important proposals in the Delta, and came up with a series of very specific recommendations, of which we adopted 2/3 of those directly into the Delta plan. We've also had a strategic plan created by the Delta Conservancy. That work, again, helped inform the Conservancy, whose role is to perform restoration in the Delta, on how best to go about that task. The Central Valley Flood Protection Board fulfilled a legislative mandate outlined in the Central Valley Flood Protection Act of 2008, which again provides protection for over 1 million people and $70 billion in infrastructure, which was completed in 2012. All of these actions, as well as the Bay Delta Conservation Plan that is out for public review right now, are interwoven actions that happen through a lot of internal coordination among those agencies to come up with an integrated series of products. That's going to continue into the future. So right now, as I said, we're in a transitional period. We have 14 policies that are now law. We have 73 recommendations. Those recommendations, as I've said before, represent other agencies' tasks that we are coordinating. One of the big complaints against the CalFed program was that there was no coordination among agencies. It's now our responsibility to provide some of that coordination. We may not be carrying the shovel that's going to throw the dirt, but we are coordinating and getting those agencies to talk to one another. Our discussion earlier about the implementation committee. The key role of that implementation committee is not to make rules and pass laws. It's to integrate existing actions that are occurring under the authorities of those member agencies. And so it's just that coordination that is really the key. It's the main power that this organization really has. So some of the other things that have
Excuse me, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would it be a useful distinction to make between policy and recommendations?
Yes.
In that we should lead on the policies and coordinate on the recommendations?
Yes,
Or something, along those lines, at least to differentiate?
yes. And I think that's very appropriate because those the policies, which are our regulatory requirements, actually, they are there because of us. So leading on those policies is absolutely what we do. Through consistency determinations and so forth, that is our role.
There are some recommendations. The levy priorities are a good example where we also play a leading role. But in many of those cases, our role is supporting, and others have got to do more of the heavy lifting.
Well, I lost that battle. I thought that should have been a policy anyway, not a recommendation. So I'm classifying that, in my parlance anyway, as a policy, because we have to do it under law.
Well, there have been, as I was saying, we're going to go into a little bit more discussion here, and it'll be fairly brief, but we'll go into a little bit more discussion on the scientific accomplishments of this year, as well as a little bit more detail into some of the other actions that we've done. But just for a feel of the other things that have occurred besides completing the Delta Plan and getting those 19, now I've lost the number, policies turned into law.
14 and
14,
17.
thank you.
14, 17.
But some of the things that we have done that's directly related to this is we've created a web-based covered action process so that other planning agencies can use our automated process to determine whether they have a covered action or not. The benefit of doing that is it's pretty darn simple, it's straightforward, and should an action that they determine to be a covered action actually be challenged and come before the council, we automatically have an administrative record that can be downloaded off of those forms. We have done some early consultation already, although it's minimal, and at this point it's not something that has gone forward into a full-blown proposal. It has been active. And of course the most notable example of that, I think, is the Lower Yolo Bypass project that we not only improve the project, its intended outcome, but we save the proponents hundreds of thousands of dollars by that consultation. So we've also been working hard on litigation response. Of course, having 26 or 29 separate appellants under 7 lawsuits, 27, creates quite a workload. And we have been working on that for several months, building the administrative record, as well as preparing for the defense of those lawsuits. And then one other thing that you're going to hear a little bit more about at the end of the day, and it's a key item, is that one of our primary responsibilities is the accountability issue. And we talked about that a little earlier. And the reason this is important is because we are mandated by the Delta Reform Act to have that accountability function, to basically talk about the status of the Delta, what's happening among the other agencies, and what are the outcomes. So it's not just a status, but it's also looking at performance measures. And so the performance measures you're going to hear a whole lot more about in a little while, but it'll be a good discussion, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But at this point, what I'd like to do is give it to Peter, and he can talk about some of the scientific accomplishments of this year and give us an overview of that, and then we'll go to Dan for some additional details. Peter?
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. And I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of where science has been, and I'd like to just re-emphasize what Chris has said. This has really been a transitional year for us, and we had anticipated that in 2012 in the science program. So we had developed a transition plan as we moved through this period of the Delta Plan wasn't completed then. We knew the Delta Science Plan was coming, but of course there's a lot of other activities which we're tasked with doing. So under that we had 8 objectives in that transition plan. And I would just like to really emphasize the staff, I think, throughout the council, but in the science program that the folks I've worked with, you really have some, I would say, nationally recognized individuals in that program in terms of their creative thinking, their willingness to think out of the box, the willingness to change in your different ways to adapt to this new reality. And also that just the hiring of Reiner, with so much experience, has brought some very new perspectives on this. So just a few of the highlights. Of course, the first objective was to support you and the Delta plan. And just under that, under GR1, there was the development of the Delta Science Plan. I won't go into that in a lot of detail. But compared with other similar programs, to have actually pulled that off in under a year, I know it sounds a long time, Mr. Nora, but on these big, complicated things with so many players, over 1,000 comments and perspectives. Many of the meetings we had in the big conferences literally had hundreds of people contributing. So that was the most important. The second way that we supported your Delta plan was the ERR6, where we were tasked with conducting workshops to understand and synthesize the state of knowledge around stressor impacts and multiple stressors. So we hosted the predation workshop, which is the first in a series of those activities. Another area where I think very innovative thinking has been put in together with our sister agency, the Delta Conservancy, on the development of the restoration framework. And I think that between the science program and the Delta Conservancy, Campbell's really done a great job in getting the right people to the table to think about how we're going to do restoration in a way that is on the sort of accelerated time frame that you heard Chris Enright talk so eloquently about. The other main area that is underway, just so you're aware, is that we realize that we're putting in a science plan. And we want to really monitor carefully the effect, the impact that the science plan has across the Delta and to California water. So to do that, we need to have some comprehensive understanding of the baseline. So for the last few weeks, in collaboration with the USGS and many others, we've just started the State of Bay Delta Science, which is the update of the 2008 report. And our idea is that's how we will judge ourselves and the impact of the science plan in the coming years. The next objective, there's many other things that I'm just pulling out a few of the highlights here. Clearly, we support and help facilitate research activities. And to give you an idea of the scale, we're still working through the 2010 project solicitation package. In the science program, we have 13 grants worth about $7.1 million. And again, at your suggestions and urging about that, rather than just waiting for the annual reports to come in, where we have clusters of projects funded, we've actually had staff, as travel funds have allowed, to actually go and visit. So it's not just an annual report, but it's an opportunity for our staff and others to sit down with the researchers and explore what they're doing, see how it's linking to the co-equal goals. So we've had staff visiting the Romberg-Tiburon Center, UC Davis, and UCLA in this past year. The other part of research which we support directly is the Science Fellows Program. And personally, I think this is just a wonderful program that you have here in California, and it's one of the hallmarks where we get a very big impact for a relatively small amount of dollars. So just in this year, we had insufficient funds to run a program this year. It's actually an off year. We had funding, I think, for about somewhere between 4.5 and fellows. But at your suggestion, this has an impact on everyone in terms of future hires, contribution to the science. And so this year we were able to make 10 awards with the Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NASA JPL, Department of Water Resources, and the USGS, all stepping up to fund other science fellows for those 10 awards. The total value of that award was $1.3 million. And again, we'd like to acknowledge the California Sea Grant that provides the very rigorous independent reviews of the PSPs and the Science Fellows Program. Also, before we made that recommendation, we had some interesting discussion with you about the impact of these fellows. So we're doing two things in collaboration with Sea Grant. We thought that was a great suggestion. So we're doing a much more detailed tracking. We've tried to go back to the full 70-something science fellows that have been funded since the start of the program. And for those new fellows that are coming in, we're expressing the importance of staying in connection with us. We see two benefits from that. One, it helps us to gauge the impact 5, 10 years in the future, but also it helps enrich our pool of panelists for reviews and things like that. So we have a much better tracking system of the science fellows. The second suggestion that you had that we really liked, we're running this early career leadership workshop. And the question was, and Chair Eisenberg has done a great job in ensuring by the time these fellows leave that training session, they know exactly how their research fits into the co-equal goals and the mission of the agency. And the fellows have actually said how much they appreciate that. They actually go out into the Delta, they see what's going on, but actually to hear from someone who's charged with guiding policy to inform management and science, you really has enriched their experience. Their comments were that this gives us a very different perspective of how our research might fit in. I would also emphasize that we don't currently have funding for a 2014 program, so any agencies out there that would be willing, we're certainly going to be talking to a lot of folks. We're not sure if we can pull it off this year or not. But clearly the value in terms of agency folks being able to see potential future hires, to work with them closely, and hopefully many of these folks will stay involved in Delta Science in the future. The next objective that we really focused on in this transition period came out of the recommendations of the series of the National Research Council reviews, particularly the 2012 May report. That came out after we'd had the transition plan in place, but there was no surprise there. One of their recommendations is there is not sufficient synthesis. There's a lot of world-class science goes on specific issues, but it gets back to Mr. Fiorina's point that how are all of these things connected? How can you look across various things? So just a few of the synthesis activities we've undertaken. We provided assistance to IEP on the peer review of their MAST, which is their synthesis program. Several of our staff, including myself, have been involved in the Baylands Ecosystem Habitats Goal update for climate change. We see this as a wonderful model, very successful in the Bay. And to sort of translate some of those experiences up into the Delta, I think are going to be very valuable. Great program. Another great synthesis activities you heard from the SFEI, Robin Grosser-Singer, Alison Whipple, their historical ecology. That's now, as you know, has been expanded to how do you actually connect this and make the understandings of how things should be in a future Delta if you want that ecological functioning. So that's ongoing. We have staff very heavily involved in that, and we'll give it whatever support we possibly can. And just one other topic under the synthesis areas, under ERR1, the preparation for the State Water Resources Control Board workshops. Those are coming up early in 2014. We'll keep you fully informed. Again, that information, you can watch it on web, and we hope that some of you will come in and listen to some of the presentations. Again, we've got a slightly different format of the panel. We've been talking to the panel members about this. We've spoken a lot to the organizing committee and the State Water Resources Control Board, of course. And I think the way we're structuring this is that both from the panelists, we're going to get a much more in-depth product out of them. Our next objective was facilitating independent scientific peer review. We discussed that earlier. As I mentioned at your urging, we took a very hard look at our peer review process. We got tremendous input right across the board, NGO community, water contractors, agencies, and that's reflected in the science program. And we'll be testing these new procedures or the modifications this year as part of the implementation of the science plan. We mentioned before the BDCP, the BDCP effects analysis review. That's been ongoing. A lot of planning happened in the last year. And the annual review of the long-term operations for biological opinions, the LOBO review, the report you've got in front of you. A few of the other things we had there are catalyze activities that build the community of Delta Science. So the science plan is about building a community. There's several activities there that are listed that Dr. Ray may talk about. Providing support to the CAMPT process. This is the remand process. How do you get the science you put together? We're operating on several levels there. We've provided support to IEP and been working very closely with the new IEP strategic plan and our science plan to make sure they fit together. And now I'd really like to acknowledge Anka Mulasolga. She's one of these personalities. Very, very difficult job, but just her force of personality and her enthusiasm for science and how that's connected to policy. We're just very fortunate to have someone like that. She could probably be at any university in the country with her academic abilities, but she's chosen to be here with IEP. And in terms of this building the community of science, we were urged, I think Mr. Nordhoff, that was you, are we looking outside our own system? The answer is yes. We attended the Puget Sound Partnership Review of Large Ecosystem Reviews earlier this year. We're in connection. How do you connect and share experiences around the US? And then it's a little premature, but we're doing a similar thing on the international level. That's in very early discussion at the moment. Another objective, which Mr. Ray will probably talk about, is communicating science. Clearly it needs to be a priority for us. We had 15 seminars this year, a little more than one a month. We heard on a huge range of topics, everything from new discoveries related to the Delta. We had international speakers talking about experiences in Asia, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. And we even learned about online citizen science. And I think Mr. Eisenberg enjoyed that talk. They have over 100,000 users working on this mapping the brain. And that technology is just taking off. So some visionary thinking there that we may well find applications for in the Delta. As you probably know, as well as these brown bags, we wanted workshops where we can bring scientists together. So in a non-confrontational, it's not which agency you're from, let's just sit down and talk science. And one of the mechanisms we have for doing that is hosted by UC Davis, their Center for Aquatic Biology and Aquaculture, or CABA seminars. And one of the things that you're urging is rather than just getting together and having discussion, let's have something more solid. So in these activities, our expectation is to have a journal article or a white paper coming out of that. The topics which we ran this year were the natural hydrographs in regulated rivers, the science of natural functional flows. And we just had wonderful feedback from that. We had over 250 people at that seminar. We had Dr. Jeff Petz from the United Kingdom, who gave that wonderful talk about different landscapes that people still talk about. For those of you who missed it, it's on our webpage. I think it's probably one of the most entertaining talks on this topic you're likely to hear. And our other topic, of course, was the tidal marshes and native fisheries. Native fish, will restoration make a difference? Huge issue. That paper is very close to, or it's in the review process, and you'll be getting a briefing on that in January. And then I won't go into the journal. We've discussed that a lot. We thought that the chair's idea of the essays on structuring science, that was an experiment. I think it was very successful. I don't know what the council have heard, but we've heard that people really enjoyed those different perspectives from some of the best people in the US on the topic. Our last two items are somewhat briefer. Maybe I'll just pick one of the objectives, and that's we support the Delta Independent Science Board. And I'd like to just make a few personal comments, having sat on that committee for a couple of cycles. You're looking back at what they achieved, it's probably been one of the most productive Independent Science Board years on record. They produced 5 very substantial letters. They produced 3 memos, a couple of those at your direct urging. And they produced the first report on adaptive management and science. So they produced the report that you heard John Ween's report to you directly on science for restoration. They've also given a number of presentations at the science conference, expressing their opinions and giving ideas and encouragement. They've also prepped extensively for the BDCP, and have actually moved their schedules around to have a lot of time, all of them, at the start of the year to accommodate the schedule. And of course, on a personal level, they had very substantive input on the development of the science plan. So when you think these are 10 individuals, very busy people, with very, very different opinions, if you've heard some of their discussions, to actually get that kind of product out is quite something, and I think it shows how high-functioning that board is. Just a couple of other things that they have achieved. Again, at your suggestion, we were very worried that we were going to lose all of the independent science board in one shot. So that's been taken care of. They've now changed their operating guidelines to do two things. They now have a rotating chair. That seems to be working very well, and there's staggered terms on for the ISB members. So those are just a few of the highlights. If you want a lot more of the details and statistics, of course we have that, but I think that captures what we had planned to do back in 2012 and the highlights for 2013.
Okay. Questions by council members? All right. Mr. Knopp, Mr. Ray?
Anything else you'd like to add to this?
Well, Peter gave me a promotion to doctorate. He certainly one-upped me in the thoroughness of his report. I just wanted to call your attention to a few items on pages 4 through 6 of the staff report, because I think they illustrate how the council is kind of refocusing its attention and its skill sets to carry out the Delta Plan. On the bottom of page, we look back on the last year. What have we accomplished since the regulations went into effect in September and the plan became effective? I think one of the things that's really been a good example of how the council can use its authorities to make suggestions and then turn that into action is the work that the council did. Councilmember Fiorini working together with Keith Coolidge and other people on our staff to put together his white paper on small storage projects. And it's really created a new way of thinking about storage. We're certainly tracking the large storage projects that the Delta Plan through studies the Delta Plan calls to complete these kind of legacy BDCP projects, or legacy CalFed projects. But this has created a whole new conversation, and already we see the Association of California Water Agencies collaborating with the Water Commission and its membership and others to begin to pull together the inventory of potential projects that hopefully can lead to some additional local action on there. And so that's a good example of sort of learning about how to use the skills the council has and the tools the council has to create action. Another good example is, I think, the work, and Peter's alluded to a bit of this, as we've both focused both planning and science talent on some of the adaptive management work that's underway. One of the things that we recognize through the briefings that we've received on the BDCP has been the importance of several adaptive management experiments that are underway right now that ultimately will determine part of the question: how much water might the BDCP be capable of delivering? You'll recall that there's 900,000 acre-feet of water, almost 1 million acre-feet of water, more than the combined yield of all the 3 large storage projects yet under study, that could be determined by how effective the water management and ecosystem restoration projects that are proposed in the BDCP might be. And so both through the science program and through the planning staff, we're really focused, as Peter said, on getting those adaptive management experiments with flow through the camped process managed properly, as well as making sure that every effort that can be made is underway to complete the tidal marsh restoration projects that are required by the current biological opinion, so that those are properly monitored, so we really learn how effective that activity can be in terms of contributing to the restoration of fish. We have spent a tremendous amount of time on the BDCP at the staff level. The changes in schedule have meant that our consultants have very graciously extended their time working with us at no small cost to themselves, because of course your contract with them requires them to recuse themselves from activities that might create conflicts of interest. And I think we're well prepared for the work that we have underway now to review the EIR and the draft plan that is on the street. It's no small accomplishment after these many years and a tremendous amount of work that plan is on the street and is available for review. And I'm sure That's requiring a lot of attention from other folks and from our partners in DWR and Fish and Wildlife. We've talked about the levy prioritization study. Two other things I just wanted to mention briefly that are summarized on page 6, two items on which we don't talk a lot about, but where the recommendations of the Delta Plan have been completed. And one is that the Central Valley drinking water policy at long last, after many years of study and discussion by the regional board, has been adopted. That's an important improvement in terms of water supply reliability. And that the Delta Regional Monitoring Program, a way to consolidate and coordinate the very disparate monitoring that many different dischargers do in the Delta of their water quality impacts, that is now launched, and so that's an important thing as well. Overall, in response to a request from Councilmember Fiorini, our staff over the last couple of weeks has done a more comprehensive review of progress on all 73 recommendations in the Delta Plan. And while we don't have a complete understanding of the activity underway, I'm sure in part because of the changes in our engineering staff, we were able just by off the top of our heads to identify important progress in 45 of the 73 recommendations of the plan. So no one should think that the activity in the Delta is sitting waiting on anything. There's a lot of progress being made. More needs to occur. But I think you can be proud of the initiatives that are underway to take advantage of the recommendations and direction you provide in the Delta Plan, and there's a lot of good work yet to be done.
All right, good.